Sony ZV-1 came out in May 2020, which makes it 3 years old this year in 2023. Is this compact camera still worth buying? And how does it compare to a modern-day smartphone like the iPhone 14 Pro? In this video, I'm going to talk about 7 pros, 7 cons to see if this camera is still worth buying. This entire video is being filmed on the Sony ZV-1. I have it on loan, so I don't get to keep it, and I'm also not being paid to say anything, and no one is reviewing this video before I post it. And I'm mostly using it for vlogging, so I'm coming at it from that perspective. Also because Sony markets this camera as a vlogging camera, but it is a compact point and shoot that can take still photos and videos. So you can use it for those purposes as well, even if you're not going to vlog. The first pro about the Sony ZV-1 is that it is a super compact camera. It's actually smaller than my iPhone, and it fits so nicely inside of my pocket or in my purse. It's just so small that it's the kind of camera that you'll always want to have with you, no matter where you're going or what you have with you. It also has a 3-inch flip-out LCD, so it's a little selfie screen, and it works really well. It's kind of a touch screen, like I feel like I can touch to tap focus, but you can't use it to like navigate through the menu, so it's like a part-way touch screen. That part could definitely be better. The ZV-1 also shoots pretty high-resolution photos and videos, considering how small it is. It has a 20-megapixel 1-inch sensor, and it's capable of shooting up to 4K 30 frames per second video and 1080p 120 frames per second slow motion video. So it can't do 4K 60 or 5K or any crazy resolutions like that, but to be honest, I usually shoot up to 4K anyway, so I'm just fine with that resolution. The camera also has a built-in zoom, so you can't swap it out with other lenses, but that zoom goes from 24 to 70 millimeters and also has an f-stop of 2.8 to 1.8. When you take that fast f-stop and combine it with the 1-inch sensor, that makes for a small camera that can shoot pretty well in low light compared to other small cameras out there. The ZV-1 also has Sony's really great autofocus. It's not the top of the line autofocus since this camera is a little bit older at this point, but you know, back in 2020, Sony cameras still had some of the best autofocus features on the market of any of the cameras. And yeah, I'm just really impressed with the autofocus on this camera. The ZV-1 also has a dedicated button on it that can blur out your background and give you some bokeh. So it's called Product Showcase, and it's meant to be used in cases like this, and so it should be focusing in on the product and blurring out the background pretty nicely. And the final great feature about the ZV-1, in my opinion, is the built-in microphone. So it's a 3-capsule directional microphone that's directly on top of the camera. You can actually see it right now. I'm not shooting with it just because I am in an area that is a little bit loud, and so just because this is a rather long video for me, I want to make sure that my sound is going to be really good throughout the whole thing. But I'll throw in some clips to let you hear what it sounds like if I'm just using that built-in microphone. Well, it's a pretty typical Seattle day today where it's a gray, overcast, and it's actually just starting to rain. We're now in one of my favorite parts of Capitol Hill, which is the Volunteer Park Conservatory. So it has like a bunch, it's like indoors, which is really nice on a colder, wet day like today. It's definitely gotten more crowded than it used to be here, and they're even charging. It used to be donation only, but now you actually have to pay a little bit of money to get inside. The camera also comes with a fluffy windscreen that you can stick on the hot shoe mount, and it looks pretty low profile when you're using this microphone, and even cute, like people will come up to you and like ask you what the little fuzzy thing in your camera is. But the other plus about this camera is that it does have a 3.5 millimeter microphone jack. So if you want to, you can plug in an external microphone like I'm doing right now. I'm actually using the DJI wireless microphone. So that one, you know, I have a transmitter right here with a built-in mic, and the receiver is right on top of the camera. It plugs right in. So I can use any of my 3.5 millimeter microphones on this camera if I ever want to enhance the audio. Next, we're going to talk about cons, but to do that, I'm going to bring our filming location indoors because a lot of people do like to film inside of their house, in their office, in studio. So this is kind of an example of what that would look like. So the first con, in my opinion, is the built-in stabilization in the camera. Now the ZV-1 does have some stabilization, and I think it's okay for what it is. I mean, it's better than nothing, but compared to a lot of the other cameras on the market or other cameras in the ZV line, the stabilization is pretty subpar. It could definitely be better. With that said, if you are going to be indoors filming on a tripod like I'm doing right now, then the stabilization obviously doesn't matter to you. But if you plan to be walking and talking or even running, Wouldn't recommend running with this camera, but you could walk at like a slow, controlled pace, and I do think that the footage looks okay when you do that. But yeah, again, if you want really good stabilization, then I recommend using this camera with a gimbal. The second thing I don't like about this camera is the slow startup time. So one benefit is that when you pop open the flip screen, the camera automatically powers on. The thing is, it takes a little while for the camera to power on, like a few seconds too long in my opinion. I think it could be cut down and just start up a lot faster. Another con is that the existing ports on this camera, there aren't too many of them, but the ones that you do have are kind of outdated. So there's a micro HDMI port and also a micro USB port. And the micro USB port can be used to charge the camera, although you can also exchange the batteries. But I don't really use micro USBs for anything anymore, so I really wish there was a USB-C instead, just for the convenience of not having to carry an extra cable for one device. And even though you can exchange the batteries, I mean, that's actually a good thing, but the battery life in this camera is just okay. I feel like I always think that this camera can go so much longer than it can, and I'm always surprised like when the low battery sign starts flashing. So battery life is okay, but again, could definitely be better. Another thing, this is really related to the whole design of the camera, but below it there's a 1/4 tripod screw for attaching the camera to a mount or like a tripod like I'm doing right now. But the issue is it is so flush like against the place where you open the little door to get to the battery or take out the SD card. And so it's just really annoying because if I want to access the battery or the card, I have to take off the mount or the tripod plate. And so that's something that I know that they fixed in the ZV-1F, which I'll talk about in the next section. But yeah, just the placement of where that tripod hole is really inconvenient and not so great if you plan to use a mount with this camera, which I think you definitely should. You know, going back to stabilization, I think it doesn't really help if you're just hand holding the camera. It helps to stabilize it at least somewhat if you can put the camera on a mini tripod. So I do recommend doing that whenever you can. Another con is the menu layout of this camera. So Sony cameras notoriously don't have the best or most intuitive menus. Even people like me that have been shooting with Sony cameras for a while, like whenever I have an older camera like this with the old menu system, it takes me so long to figure out where things are. And so I can only imagine what a beginner to Sony cameras is going through when they're trying to go through this menu and figure things out. So again, that's something that has been improved on newer cameras, but this ZV-1 does have a rather complicated menu. And the seventh thing that bugs me about this camera is the lens. So it's great that it has a built-in lens, and you know, generally speaking, I think 24 to 70 is a good range if you're shooting behind the camera. If you're going to be shooting in front of the camera and actually holding the camera out, I do think that 24 mil is actually a little too tight. I prefer something at least 16 millimeters to be able to hand hold this camera and vlog with it. But again, not everyone is going to use the camera like that. So if you're using it just like this, you're planting the camera on the tripod, stabilization doesn't really matter to you, and potentially the lack of a wide angle lens on the camera won't bother you either. So for these last couple sections, we moved inside of my studio. I'm really curious to see how this camera performs. We are shooting on the camera. We're using an external microphone still because I've somewhat soundproofed this room, but it's still not optimal for how far away the camera is. And so the first thing I want to talk about is that ZV-1F that I mentioned. That's the camera that is one of the newer cameras in the Sony ZV line. It came out late last year. I did a couple of videos on it, so you can see those videos if you want to hear about them, you know, separately. But basically, that camera is a beginner entry-level version of this camera. So it is a little bit cheaper. The ZV-1, by the way, is $750 US. The ZV-1F is $450 US. So cheaper, and it has some things kind of restricted in it as a result though. Like the stabilization is actually a little bit worse. And the biggest trade-off, in my opinion, is the fact that the lens is fixed. You get a tiny little bit of zoom, but it's not as robust as the 24 to 70 that you're getting in the ZV-1. But despite those things, the ZV-1F does do a few things right, such as using a USB-C cable. It, again, has a wider lens. It has a tripod hole off to the side, so you don't have to take off your mount in order to access your memory card and your battery. So certain things about it, including the price, are a little bit more attractive in the ZV-1F. Another option in the Sony ZV vlogging line is the ZV-E10, which is actually brand new. It's the same price as the ZV-1. It's about $750. But the thing about the ZV-E10 is that you can take the lens off. So actually that price does not include a lens. You have to buy a lens to go with it. So it's actually more than $750 when you account for buying the lens. But it is nice because you can put pretty much any of Sony's lenses on that camera. And it's a benefit over the ZV-1 because the ZV-1 has, a fixed lens that you can't take off. So that's another option out there. And there's also the brand new Sony ZV-E1, which just came out like less than a month ago. I've got a video on that camera as well, but that's, more, they're calling it like a vlogging or content creator camera, but the specs and also the price are definitely aimed more at professionals. It's $2,200. So kind of in a different league if you're looking at that camera. And again, I have a dedicated review of it if you want to check that camera out. So is the Sony ZV-1 still worth buying in 2023? I think that even if the brand new version of the Sony ZV-1 were to come out tomorrow, then yes, you should still get this camera as long as you can get it on sale or used, because this camera has really held its value well in terms of quality. It's still an awesome video camera and photo camera if you're looking for that point and shoot style camera out there. Now, I did mention that I'm going to compare it to the iPhone, and I'll make some brief comments about it, but I'm actually making a dedicated comparison video of this camera compared to the GoPro, compared to the DJI Pocket 2, and yeah, that's going to be a very long video. I'm working on it. It's taking me a long time. I'll leave a link in the description when it's ready. So, very briefly, I love my iPhone, and the iPhone 14 Pro in particular, like, the camera is so good. I shoot with it all the time, and I always have it with me, so that's the good thing about shooting with an iPhone. The bad thing about shooting with an iPhone is that it is so much more than a camera. It is your communication device, it is perhaps your financial banking device, it, does so much for you. So if you lose it or damage it, like, it is a lot more painful than doing that to a dedicated camera. iPhones are also more expensive, especially, the price goes up depending on how much storage you get on your iPhone. You can't expand it like you can on a camera like the ZV-1. And I personally think that point and shoot style cameras like this are also more ergonomic, and they just inspire me creatively in a way that's different than shooting on an iPhone. So yeah, if you can afford it, definitely get a secondary camera. And if you're looking for a point and shoot style camera, I would definitely go for the ZV-1 as long as you can get it at a discount. But those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.